Hi, and welcome to the Spiritual Awakener podcast. This is a podcast where I get to interview really cool people about their lives, about their stories, and how they've spiritually awakened to help you, the collective. And I'm really excited for my next guest. We've been having a chat before we recorded this, and I'm really excited for you to hear his story and to listen to how he can help you, but also how important it is to remember that you have this incredible light within that you can awaken at any moment. Christian, I didn't even try to say your surname, but I'm going to. Christian de la Heurta. Is that okay?
It's
Not bad?
That's not bad at all. It's de la
So lovely to have you here on the Spiritual Awakener. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Susan. I'm so honored to be on your show. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So tell us about you.
Well, let's see. I was born in Cuba. So I lived in a communist regime for the first 10 years of my life. We came to this without speaking a word of English and landed in a small town in the center of Georgia. So not a metropolis by any stretch of the imagination. And they didn't take very kindly to foreigners. And my parents in Cuba were involved in the counter-revolution, so they were conspiring against the communist regime. And so I kind of grew up with this implicit message of kind of hiding yourself. You didn't want to be seen too much, because of my parents' pod of friends. They were the only ones who kind of dodged either spending 20 years in jail or being shot to death. And yet I always had this sense of mission. So there was sort of this, how do I reconcile those two things? The needing to express that we all have, and to express our unique human potential. And at the same time, it's like, whoa, don't show yourself too much.
So the 3D world, of, oh my God, I've got to be on guard. I've got to watch myself. There's something outside there that could get me. And then the kind of opposite of knowing that your soul had this incredible knowing, a mission that needed to get out there, but you probably didn't know what you didn't know at that point, right?
Yeah, it's because we translate it through whatever filters we have on at the time. So growing up in a very Catholic family, I'm one of 9 kids, I translated that initially as wanting to be a priest.
Wow. Gosh.
And looking back on it, I mean, I know I have a legitimate, what they call a calling, a vocation. And looking back on it, in those days, I kind of naively thought that priests were celibate. And I was so conflicted about my sexuality that I thought that was the way that I could sublimate it. And I didn't have to deal with sexuality at all. So not an effective strategy, but by the end of my teens, I realized that religion just didn't, it wasn't a match for me. It didn't have room for me.
You didn't have room for it.
Exactly. Well, I didn't realize that until later, but yes. Yes. And
that's a square peg in a round hole type thing, isn't it? That we talk about. It's like try to fit ourselves into a place that we should be, or we think we should be, when we're really never fitting there.
Yeah, exactly. But initially, because I had tried to so desperately to fit in, and I didn't know there was another way of looking at things. That's just what I had grown, and to believe that there was the one true faith. And so when I kicked out when I threw the baby out with the baptismal water, it was difficult. It was like, I mean, it's a process that many of us go through. I just had to go through it at a younger age, and it was a matter of survival. Like, who am I and what am I really doing here?
Do you think that's like people talk about the dark night of the soul? Do you feel, I mean, and look at the world now, do you feel, that's reflecting really, isn't it? What some people are going through.
Yeah. But I think there's different layers of that dark night of the soul. That's definitely one of them. A deeper one subsequently is understanding, which is another shift in identity, but understanding that we are not the little individual ego personality identity, that we are so much greater than that. But in that process of re-identifying, it can be confusing and it can be disconcerting.
So that power that and we're definitely going to talk about your book shortly, but that power that we have within is that I am presence that I talk about and I teach, and we all have that. That I am presence is the part of the knowing, that big part of you. And I liken it to taking off this jacket, which is our clothes and our body. We take off the jacket and underneath is this incredible light that can be anything, complete optimal, anything we want to be in the world. And then we put the jacket back on and we go, oh my God, like I couldn't possibly do that, or I should just stay small, or I can't be seen, or whatever it might be. And I always liken it to that. The I am presence has the complete empowerment within. And then when we put the jacket back on, all the childhood stuff, all the childhood aspects and the trauma parts and the bits of dust in our field, and they're the bits that stop us. And I suppose being brought up in perfect, you chose perfectly, didn't you, to be brought up in that environment of, communism, really. You chose beautifully because it would have grown your soul so much. But at the time, you wouldn't have felt that was a really good place to be at all.
Yeah, I see the wisdom of and the gift of those experiences now. I love the metaphor of the jacket, though. I use a similar one. Which is like, because I know you ask a lot of your guests about the process of awakening. And so I use the metaphor of if you put a football in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego identity is. That's our sense of individual personality. Who we are is actually the stadium. And yet we've allowed this tiny part of our consciousness, this infinitesimal part of who we are, to run the show and to think that it is the sun rather than just the sunbeam to the sun.
And being kicked around as well, right?
Yes.
But I do love the visual. That's a great visual, actually, to imagine yourself, you think you're this ball on a field. We call it football here in the UK, of course, and it's this ball in the field, and yet you are the stadium. I mean, that is just an incredible visual to look at, isn't it? And the potential of that. So how did you kind of step forward from that? You were a teenager, you were feeling these feelings of deep feelings within, and you didn't know what to do with them. How did you deal with them?
Well, there were two. I would say, because I was thinking about that question before we got on the call. I think there were probably two main phases. One was in my late teens, my early 20s, when I did kick the crutches of organized religion as I knew it. And so I went through a phase that was difficult, as I said, but three things happened. I took a class, my first philosophy class at university. It was existentialism. So that began a process of questioning. It deepened my questioning. I also started a phase of experimentation with mind expanding substances, which sped up that
ayahuasca or other stuff, or
no, ayahuasca wasn't around at the time. Other stuff.
Okay, other stuff. How old were you then?
18, 19.
Oh, you were really young to do that. Yeah.
And it was that thirst, that drive to understand who I was. So yeah, and then I fell in love, and had actually had a meeting with the head of the Jesuits. I went to a Jesuit high school, and thankfully he was a wise man, and he said, well, why don't you do a couple of years in college? In those 2 years of college, those three things happened, and then I fell in love, and I had never had that experience of having sex and making love at the same time, and that just healed any ambivalence or confusion that I had about sexuality. It was so beautiful that there was, going forward, the Jesuits didn't stand a chance. So I would say that was the first phase. And the second phase was my 20s. I mostly, like I said, I kind of kicked the baby out with the bathwater. I
Yeah.
didn't understand then that there was a difference between religion and spirituality,
Yeah.
and that we could choose our own spiritual expression that is congruent with who we are and a match with who we are. So I kind of spent my 20s developing personally, professionally, that kind of thing. Um, and yet, as I was approaching 30, it was the seemed like had a pretty enviable life. Had a condo on the water in Miami Beach.
Sounds idyllic, really.
Yeah, I had a great
Yeah.
cushy job. I made my own schedule, expense account, sports car, the Armani suits, all that good stuff. And the more it was sought after, socially and professionally, the more that there was something missing. And I just kept thinking there has to be more to life than this. And so I started reconnecting with, I looked east. I started looking at Eastern traditions and discovered about the mystical traditions of the West. And then was led to breathwork. And it was my very first breathwork session that I was never the same. It changed me forever. I was on a track to get a PhD in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist, so I come out of that tradition. And when I did that first breathwork session, it was like everything changed. I never went for the PhD, and I had experienced myself as the stadium, and understood what the football is and how it works and how it keeps a prison.
That opening, that door opening, and it's kind of, we spoke before we went live, and I said there were so many parallels. Well, I'd forgotten one parallel, which was I was training in psychotherapy in North London, in the Freud Center, basically, Tavistock Center, very well known, and I found transcendental meditation. Oh my God! And at that moment, I was like, why am I doing psychotherapy? What was that all about? But I had chosen to do a 3-year training in it, and I'd only just stepped onto it. So I decided to carry it on. And actually, it was the right thing for me to do. But literally, when you find something, as you found breath work, I found TM at that moment in time, the door just opened. And none of that made any sense anymore. Completely different, isn't it? You see the world in a completely different way.
Yeah. I mean, for me, some of it made sense, but it was sort of like you outgrew the snake skin, and then that old snake skin could just no longer contain you, so you just had to break out of it.
Wow. And I can see that like a visual. Imagine that you're kind of almost not trapped, but kind of restricted in that snake skin or that cocoon or whatever you want to see it as. And then you come out of it either as a new snake, which is fine, or a butterfly, with that freedom. And truly, I can really feel that energy as I'm talking about it, and the guides are gathering in here, and they're saying, about integrity, that pure integrity that you have within of who you really are in the world, that gets shown. That's what I'm hearing from my guides telling me. So that's amazing, that you went through that, and then you just went, and then what happened after that?
Well, that sense of mission that was still there just finally had a way to express itself that was a real match. So with those two understandings, having breath work as a healing tool, and it works so fast and heals at so many levels. And I know you also do work with trauma and PTSD. It's like, I have yet to come across anything that heals trauma as quickly as it does. And I'm talking serious stuff. I work with so many people with sexual abuse and rape, and people who have experienced violent crime, and it gets healed just from breathing. And to the rational, scientific, more skeptical part of me, my mind, it's like, doesn't make any sense. Just from breathing, how does that work? And on top of that, you can have some of the most amazing, profound experiences of oneness and connectedness.
Connection. I think that is the key.
Yes.
That they're feeling connected, because such as addiction, as and all of the trauma, that is almost a trying to find connection and not having the connection, and then coming back to it. So I think the breath, as I'm listening to you, it must find that space of connection, as silence does, stillness.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
And you know, I don't think science is there yet in terms of explaining how breath work heals so profoundly.
Yeah.
You know, they haven't studied it like they've done so much study as what's going on with the brain and when we meditate. But breath work isn't there yet. But so here's the way that I understand that makes sense to me. In most spiritual traditions and even some secular languages, the same word can mean spirit or breath, depending on the context. And so, for example, pneuma, from that Greek word, we get both lung, used to mean lung and soul. And from the Latin spirare, from that root, we get both respiration and inspiration or expiration.
I love that.
So that's the part that makes sense to me. It's the holy breath. It's the breath of life.
Wow. So if you're listening to this and like me, you're trying to breathe while you were listening to Christian talk, because when you talk about breath, it's almost like it brings you back to that human part of you, you know, your soul having a human experience, but that part of you of human, you have to breathe. You know, without the breath, you're not living basically here. Your soul is not experiencing the human form. So I don't know if you're listening to this and you feel, oh my goodness, yeah, actually, when I'm in fear, I breathe at the top of my lungs, you know, in that sympathetic, we talked about it, didn't we, sympathetic nervous system. Just for a moment, perhaps Christian, would you just for a second, just take us through how to really come into that breath? I know I didn't talk to you about that at the beginning, it's just come to me. So if you can just this 1 second, isn't it, or 2 seconds, just to get us to come into that space.
Yeah. And take
people need it right now.
Yes, isn't that interesting? Like the worldwide pandemic, at least in this country, but not just in this country, the I Can't Breathe, you know, pandemic of inequality and social injustice and systemic racism that's really rampant all over the world, which also was, I can't breathe was the sign of it, the symbol of it. So important because what happens is, like you were pointing to, when we hit like the emotions, when the emotions come up and we get triggered, first thing that goes is the breath. Like we shut down the breath and we start taking very shallow.
We can feel it here, like right at the top. For the purpose of the audio, we can feel it at the top of our chest, can't we? And that's where I believe the shock comes into the heart in that moment, and we hold it.
Yes, and that's how those emotions get lodged in the tissues of our body. You know, what used to be spiritual teaching that everything is energy, now we know from quantum physics that it's true. That means the body and the emotions are also energy.
Exactly.
And energy cannot be destroyed.
No.
Just because we stuff those emotions because we're afraid of them and we've been conditioned to think that they're weakness, they just don't go away. So
I agree.
After years and a lifetime of suppressing our emotions, we walk around with layers upon layers upon layers of emotional crap. And then here we are trying to have a relationship, trying to make our relationships work. And no wonder they mostly fail, because we haven't been taught how to hold them, how to approach them, how to contextualize them. And we certainly haven't been taught how to clear ourselves of all that repressed emotional crap.
Which my children have. They've been brought up. I mean, they've been brought up to connect and use energy work and talk about their emotions. And and
that's our hope, right? That they're like their spiritual oases that will get bigger and bigger as more people start finding out about these principles.
And they manifest, and they, you know, they're like, oh, let's manifest a parking space, Mom, I'll just see it for you. You know, it's that kind of thing. So they're constantly in this realm of knowing that they are incredible beings of light, having a human experience. So so maybe there are more children like that are going to be our next generation that will be coming in. But I just want to pick up, I mean, I definitely want you to do a little breath experience for us, because I know the audience now is like, well, I really want that now. But I just want to say that, you know, do you feel that what is happening in the world is a huge amount of people's, let's just say, for argument's sake, childhood fears and childhood trauma that is coming up, that's stopping them from breathing, and then that's showing up in the physical, do you feel?
I think that's definitely going on. I think there's also generational trauma that we now know, just like you were talking about this study about the connectedness being at the root of all addictions, this longing for connection. A couple of years ago, they also discovered that trauma gets passed on epigenetically through our DNA from generation to generation. So we're carrying an accumulation of trauma and emotional crap. And that's, to me, the magic of the breath, like the healing power of the breath, that it clears it. And it happens fast and just from breathing. And, it's like, I know that sounds too good to be true, but I can't argue with results, both from my personal experience and from having witnessed countless healings, just from people learning how to use the breath.
So in your book, which you can see behind you, Awakening the Soul of Power, amazing. What do you talk about throughout it? I purposely didn't read it, I told you, because I like to talk to my guests before. So what could you talk to people about that book? What would they gain from it, from being part of that energy?
Yeah, well, I spent the whole third talking about understanding the ego mind. So understanding the self-made prison of the little football, so that we can have that experience of ourselves as the stadium. So for just that alone, it's worth it. The theme of it is, how do we step into power in a way that's not about hierarchy, control, fear, force, domination, manipulation? How do we do it in a way that we don't have to push somebody down, step on them, put our knee to their neck in order for us to prop ourselves up and feel powerful? So most of us have an ambivalent relationship to power. We want it and we long for it, but we're afraid of it. And at the core, I think we're afraid that we might abuse it and cause harm. And no wonder, all we got to do is glance through the headlines on any given day and witness at least one abuse of power. And add to that the fact that we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, it's a negative thing. And Lord Acton, British Lord, I think British Lord. So he's the one who said power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. What they didn't tell us was that he was speaking specifically about political power, not interpersonal power.
You definitely know that corrupts, right?
No question.
No question, that one.
No question. So add to that mix the fact that we're talking about, we are terrified of feeling our emotions, and we hate conflict, we avoid confrontation. So what happens is we end up giving our power away, our innate, inherent power that nobody can give to us and nobody can take away. We are the only ones who can give it away. And we do it so tragically. We give away our power for an illusion of security, for a false sense of acceptance, and for morsels, crumbs of pseudo love.
That's so powerful, actually. That's really powerful, the way you said that, because if you really think about that, perhaps what we do, and I know you said you did that in your journey as well, you were really successful in a particular part of your life, career, and you had the car, you had the suits, you had everything, the condo. I'm not sure what a condo is, but anyway, it's a building presumably that you live in, a house you live in. But you had all of that, which we might see as, status and hierarchy. But if we strip that away, then that's the football, right?
Yes.
But deep within was the stadium.
Yes.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean
more powerful. Way more powerful.
But it doesn't mean that the stadium can't be abundant love, that is what it's all about. And I do talk about that a lot, like it's okay to be free with abundance. It's okay to beautify your home, or beautify if you travel all over the world. Luckily, hopefully soon we might be able to do that again. But it's okay to do that and not to see it as a bad thing. But it's when you just focus on that, then that is, I don't know, it's just kind of making you feel better about yourself, because you might have that car, or you might have that house, or you might have that suit, right?
Yes. So that's exactly, it's not, because we've also been conditioned that the eye of the needle, the camel on the eye of the needle thing, right? It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. So, that's also been conditioned into us. But it's the attachment, right? It's when we identify ourselves with, like connecting it back to power. We think people who are powerful, who are they, right? They have money, they have fame, they're high up in some kind of hierarchy, whether it's a corporate ladder or some kind of organization or institution. But all those things are outside of us, right? So they're fickle. They're here today, gone tomorrow. And how many more examples do we need of famous people, powerful people who are miserable and thin-skinned and whose sense of who they are is completely dependent on a tweet, and who take their lives.
When they go into it, I think they go into, whatever it is, music, acting, stage, whatever it is, I think they go into it with this, mission to make people happy, like have a mission to make people happy and, show another side, but then that gets taken over with the power of mainstream media or whatever it might be, TV, Hollywood, whatever it might be. And I think that gets taken over. And that's when they go massively into that space of, oh my God, well, now I'm in it, I can't get out of it. And I think we hear that a lot.
And how often do we hear them, these celebrities taking their own life or developing addiction problems? So we know that all the power and all the money in the world is not going to make anybody happy.
Even doctors, and I work with doctors as well, so they're beautiful people. They go into it to be healers. They go into it to do no harm, which is the Hippocratic Oath, right? But what do we see now? We see, energy of corruption, and we see energy of following a line because we have to. We're told to do this. We're told not to say anything. We're told, and we have the doctor kind of label, and so we have to stay that way. And I see this a lot now. So that power is being used in a way that is not really what they went into being a doctor for.
Yes, and so that's the message of the book, that there is a way that we can step into our own power. That doesn't have to mean that we abuse others, that does not have to cause harm, and that does not corrupt us. So in the same way that you were talking about money, that you can have abundance and it doesn't have to corrupt you, as long as we know who we are. So the stronger our sense of self, the less that we are dependent on external validation. Like, we don't need anybody to tell us who we are. We know who we are. And that's the soulful power that I write about. It is humble. It doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. It just is. And an exemplar of that is Gandhi, who in his simple monastic robes and sandal feet, when the British Empire was at its highest point in terms of global reach, brought it to its knees without ever shooting a gun or landing a single punch.
Yeah.
Talk about power.
That really is. And that makes you take a breath, if you're listening to this, and it makes me take a breath. When you think about the power of your words that are coming through you. And I know that, everyone listening to this, they understand that we are a channel, we are a channel for our mission. We're a channel for source, really. And I can feel the power of that channel coming through you as I'm talking to you. And I'm sure that my listeners will as well, because it makes me take a breath. So I'm sure it makes them take a breath as they listen to it. So how can they get your book, Christian?
One more thing I want to say, though, to complete the thought about the abundance. It's like I went through the process of when I went on my spiritual journey 30 years ago. I gave it all away, sold my condo, quit my job, broke up with a partner, gave away everything except for my books and my Armani suits. So it tells you a little bit about my attachment.
Just had to keep one of those. Yeah.
And it was an incredibly tough period of my life. And I learned to trust. Like, I learned trust at the cellular level. Now, that like I live in a beautiful, magnificent house. I don't own it. I don't need to own it. I feel like I'm the steward of this house, which I actually treat as a temple, call it a temple, honoring all the traditions, but particularly dedicated to the sacred feminine. So it's a goddess feminine, it's a goddess temple, because we've been running so off kilter. But anyway, to your question, I thank you for asking it. The book is available wherever books are sold. So on Amazon, your local bookstore, and they can also reach me on my website, which is soulfulpower.com.
Yeah. I had a look at your website. Yeah, absolutely. I was having a look at you before we came on the show. So is there anything that you can teach my listeners? So from the perspective, if they've got a little tip of how to breathe, I know we know how to connect with that, but sometimes people don't know that. And so is there a tip that you can take them through, that you can, perhaps take us through in this moment?
Yeah, there's so many breathing techniques with different purposes. There's some that are the slower, deeper breathing is if you want to relax, if you want to drop in, if you want to become more present. You can do a fast, like the yoga breath of fire, like if you want to, not before bedtime, obviously, but if you want to like energize yourself, like I did that right before this call, because it's early here. And not that it's early, because I wake up early, but I hadn't even spoken to anybody yet by the time we got on.
You're my first one.
Energize myself and
I love the breath of fire, actually, because I do it in Kundalini yoga, and I love the breath of fire. And it not only does it give you a really toned body, which is always helpful, but it also allows you to bring that heat. I don't know, I think you get kind of a real heat with it in that breath. Yeah, and it really does calm you down, but energizes you.
It comes from the power center.
Yeah, the solar plexus area and the sacral area, and yeah, absolutely.
So the main thing about the breath for your listeners and your audience, it's becoming conscious, right? Like I can really practice it. So you're going through the day and maybe develop some kind of trigger that whenever you see the color blue or the color pink, whatever the color it is, just or some kind of like a certain kind of flower, a certain kind of tree, that's a trigger for you to pause. And all it takes is 10 seconds, pause and deepen your breath. Right. And so that becomes second nature to you, so that
to deepen it, what does that mean for people? Because I know what that means, but what does that mean? So, I always put my hands on my heart, which is a connection to heart. And so would you say that, put your hands on your heart?
That's very helpful, because it also brings you into your heart center. And then you could even put it over your lower, so you bring your breath deeper into your belly, into your core. And that alone will shift everything. Because
so let's just do this together for everyone listening. Let's just come put your hands on your heart, or one hand. Obviously, if you're driving, you're not going to be doing this, obviously, but just come into your heart space for a moment. So Christian, do you want to take everyone through breathing?
Yes, and just begin to connect with your breath. Just notice your breath initially. Like notice the inhale and notice the exhale. And just allow it to relax. Allow yourself to relax so that the breath can breathe you. Right? So we open up to the breath, giving it free access. And we begin by connecting with it, by noticing the differences between the inhale and the exhale. And it might be subtle. It might be temperature. It might be where the air caresses the roof of your mouth. It might be just slightly different as it enters or leaves your body. And that simple act of connecting with your breath begins to deepen your relationship with it. And it begins to drop you into yourself and begin to become more present, more aware.
Beautiful. I think also, so just stay in that moment if you're listening to this, but I think also it gives you that sense of alignment as well. I definitely feel that when I connect with my breath, I feel myself aligning. So I feel like my whole body becomes much straighter. And so I'm aligning to the channel that works through all of us, so that we can be more present in that, and then therefore our mission. Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful. Christian, that was amazing. You know, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I can really feel the beautiful energy with you. I'm sure my listeners will be able to as well. And they can contact you at, just say your website once again.
Soulfulpower.com.
Soulfulpower.com. And if you have really enjoyed this conversation, which I know you will have done, then please reach out to Christian and maybe join his newsletter or even read his book. And if you would like to be a guest on The Spiritual Awakener, then please contact me at susankennard.co.uk. Thank you so much for joining us on The Spiritual Awakener, and we'll see you on the next episode.